What if the main secret to the incredible resilience of an entire society lies not in its wealth of resources, but in its harsh, unforgiving cold and constant lack of comfort? We are accustomed to thinking of progress as the elimination of hardship, but the history of the northern peoples proves the opposite. While modern megacities are critically dependent on thousands of fragile supply chains, electrical grids, and external resources, ancient Scandinavian communities were built on a foundation that could not be destroyed by sanctions or power cuts. We often think of the Viking Age as just a series of endless raids, but behind the glint of their axes lay a phenomenal ability to survive in the most inhospitable corners of the earth. The Scandinavians built their settlements on the shores of icy fjords and rocky cliffs, creating autonomous worlds. Capable of functioning for years in complete isolation from the rest of humanity, their longhouses, where people and livestock lived under one roof, were not just dwellings, but highly efficient thermal machines. How did a handful of people in a snow-covered wilderness manage not only to exist, but to thrive and dictate their will to all of Europe? Watch the video to the end, and you will learn the true reasons for the remarkable unsinkability of Viking settlements. We will reveal the secrets of their way of life, which allowed them to turn deadly isolation into a source of indomitable inner strength, and understand what their experience can teach us today. The hidden truth that everyone is silent about lies in the unique construction of ancient foundations. Northern builders erected longhouses from thick oak trunks and tightly fitted planks. The earthen floor was compacted to the hardness of stone to retain internal heat during the winter months. The frame of the building was reinforced with massive wooden beams capable of withstanding the hurricane-force winds of stormy coasts. This design transformed an ordinary dwelling into a veritable fortress amid the cold fjords. The construction of such a building required the enormous efforts of the entire community, without exception. Men chopped wood with sturdy steel axes, carefully selecting the straightest tree trunks. The women were busy gathering clay and moss to insulate the gaps between the massive logs. Every element of the structure was thought out to the smallest detail in order to conserve scarce heat as much as possible. The central hearth served as the main source of heating and a place for cooking. Smoke from the hearth escaped through a special opening in the high roof of the house. This opening also provided minimal ventilation for the room during the harsh winter. The roof was covered with a thick layer of turf, which served as additional natural insulation. The thickness of this turf covering could reach several tens of centimeters. This approach made the dwelling virtually invulnerable to the piercing northern winds. The interior space of the longhouse was divided into several functional areas. In the center was a spacious hall for general gatherings, work, and meals. Along the walls were wide wooden benches that served as places to rest and sleep. Under the benches were stored supplies of tools, warm clothing, and important household items. The strict order inside the room ensured the efficiency of daily work. Such a house became the true center of life for several generations of one family. Constant cohabitation formed incredibly strong social bonds between the inhabitants. People learned to understand each other at a glance and act as a single, well-coordinated mechanism. In conditions of constant threat of cold and hunger, individualism became an unaffordable luxury. The survival of each individual directly depended on the well-being of the entire group. Repairs to dwellings were also carried out exclusively through the joint efforts of all inhabitants. Boards damaged by storms were replaced with new ones as quickly as possible, thanks to the availability of spare materials. Wood for repairs was harvested continuously throughout the short summer. The settlement always had a sufficient supply of logs in case of unforeseen destruction. Such foresight ensured rapid recovery after any natural disasters. Particular attention was paid to protecting the settlement from external threats and storms. A high palisade of pointed wooden stakes was often erected around the houses. The entrance gates were made of the thickest logs and locked with massive oak bolts. Inside the fenced area were warehouses with supplies of firewood and building materials. These supplies allowed the community to survive long periods of bad weather without leaving the walls. The appearance of the settlement reflected its main function of continuous survival. There was no room for excessive decoration or useless architectural refinements. Every detail served a strict practical purpose of preserving heat or protecting property. The pragmatism of northern builders became the benchmark for the rational use of limited natural resources. It was this austere simplicity that made Viking villages virtually immortal. The inability to leave the community and survive alone united people more strongly than any oath. Expulsion from the settlement in those days was tantamount to certain death in the icy wasteland. Therefore, every resident tried to be as useful as possible to their longhouse. This system created a society with the highest level of personal responsibility. It would be interesting to hear viewers' opinions about this way of life. Please leave your comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. What happens behind the closed doors of the northern house destroys modern ideas about management. Within the community, there was an extremely strict and clear hierarchy without the slightest uncertainty. Each member of the group clearly knew their daily tasks and area of personal responsibility. Work was not divided into prestigious or humiliating, it was divided into necessary and vital. The absence of bureaucracy allowed decisions to be made quickly and without unnecessary debate. The settlement was led by the most experienced and respected leader, who had proven his wisdom. His orders were not discussed, but carried out with maximum speed and accuracy. At the same time, the leader was personally responsible for the survival of every member of his community. A wrong decision could cost the community its winter supplies and lead to disaster. Therefore, management was based on a deep knowledge of nature and many years of practical experience. Master craftsmen occupied a special place in the social structure of northern settlements. Blacksmiths forged sturdy axes, reliable knives, and strong nails for shipbuilding. Woodcarvers created sturdy furniture, oars, and parts for looms. Weavers worked day and night to create warm woolen clothing and durable sails. Their craftsmanship ensured the village's technological independence from the outside world. Farmers and resource gatherers were the foundation of the group's economic survival. They worked the rocky soil, harvested crops, and gathered wood under the most difficult conditions. Working the land required incredible physical endurance and stubbornness. The harvested crops were immediately distributed to special warehouses for long-term storage. Proper distribution of supplies ensured a full winter for all residents. The younger generation learned skills from their elders through constant collaboration. Training took place not in theory, but in the process of daily hard work. Teenagers helped the masters, learned how to use tools and repair dwellings. The transfer of knowledge from hand to hand ensured the continuity of craft traditions. In this way, a new generation of skilled and hardy workers was formed. Women played a key role in managing the internal economy of the longhouse. They controlled the distribution of food, kept the fire going, and supervised the making of clothing. In the absence of men who had gone on expeditions, women took over the entire management of the village. Their authority in matters of internal economy was unquestionable and absolute. This ensured a perfect balance of roles and the smooth functioning of the entire settlement. The system of responsibilities excluded the possibility of idle or useless people in the community. Those who were not skilled with their hands helped carry heavy loads or gather firewood. Physical labor was the only way to prove one's value to the group. Laziness was strictly condemned and could cause serious conflicts within the community. This work ethic made the society incredibly productive and strong.
I thought I would collapse before we ate.
The interchangeability of people was another secret to survival in the harsh climate. If one craftsman was injured, another villager immediately took over his work. Almost every adult possessed basic construction and repair skills. This prevented important processes from being interrupted due to the loss of a single specialist. The settlement functioned as a single organism capable of self-recovery. The rigid structure left no room for individual crises or soul-searching. People simply did what they had to do for the common good. The meaning of life was to preserve the community and continue the family line. Such clarity of purpose provided enormous psychological stability in the face of adversity. How exactly did this structure affect the economy? The answer to this mystery awaits viewers in the next chapter. The secret that has only now been revealed is the absolute independence of the northern settlements. The Viking village was a closed economic cycle that did not require external inputs.
But necessary if we are to feed the settlement.
Everything necessary for life was produced exclusively within the community itself. Tools, warm clothing, dishes, and building materials were created by local craftsmen. The lack of dependence on trade made the settlement invulnerable to external crises. The basis for self-sufficiency was a deep understanding of the properties of local natural materials. Different types of wood were used for specific construction tasks. Oak was used for ship keels and load-bearing beams in longhouses because of its strength. Ash and pine were used to make axe handles and light shields. The competent use of resources eliminated the production of useless waste. Blacksmithing was at the heart of the technological independence of northern villages. Forests were usually located on the outskirts of settlements for fire safety reasons. Here, pig iron was smelted from bog ore to create essential tools. The blacksmith's hammer never stopped for a day, providing the community with new axes and nails. Having their own metallurgy gave them a huge advantage over their neighbors. Textile production was also entirely concentrated inside the longhouse. Women used vertical looms to create thick woolen fabric. The process of spinning yarn and weaving took up most of the long winter evenings. The finished fabric was used to sew warm clothes that could protect against the icy sea wind. Without these clothes, survival in the north would have been physically impossible. Salt extraction and food preservation ensured food security. Salt was evaporated from seawater in large metal cauldrons over an open fire. Salted and dried foods could be stored for years in cold storerooms. Cold smoking technology was also widely used to create reserves for the winter. These reserves constituted the community's inviolable fund in case of crop failure. The production of ceramic and wooden tableware covered all household needs. Wooden bowls and spoons were carved from soft woods using ordinary knives. Ceramic pots were molded by hand and fired in special earthen kilns. The tableware was incredibly durable and had a simple, functional design. No external supplies were needed to provide the kitchen with everything it needed. Shipbuilding was the pinnacle of the local carpenter's craftsmanship. The technology of shipbuilding was passed down exclusively within the group of craftsmen. The planks were fastened with iron rivets forged in the local smithy. The gaps between the planks were caulked with resin and wool to make them completely waterproof. Having its own fleet allowed the community to explore new territories. The autonomy of the settlement meant that destroying one element of it was not enough. The loss of the forge did not mean destruction, as the anvil could be moved to another location. A fire in the warehouse was compensated for by the immediate collection of new resources by the entire community. Resilience was achieved through the duplication of skills and the absence of bottlenecks in production. Be sure to like this video to support the channel. The secret that will change the industry has its origins in ancient metallurgical technologies. Iron mining in the north was an extremely difficult process that required incredible perseverance. Craftsmen did not have access to rich mountain mines, so they used bog ore. This ore was collected at the bottom of peat bogs in the form of rusty lumps of mud. The process of turning this mud into strong steel seemed like a real magic ritual. First, the collected bog ore had to be thoroughly dried in the open air. Then, it was burned on bonfires to remove excess moisture and organic impurities. At the same time, large-scale preparation of charcoal for smelting furnaces was carried out. Charcoal production required the controlled smoldering of huge stacks of wood under a layer of turf. Only high-quality charcoal could provide the temperature necessary for smelting. The smelting furnaces were built from refractory clay and stones in the form of tall cylinders. Prepared charcoal and roasted bog ore were poured inside in layers. Air was pumped into the furnace using large leather bellows, which were continuously operated by assistants. The temperature inside the furnace had to reach enormous levels to separate the slag. Working at the red-hot furnace exhausted people to the limit of their physical capabilities. As a result of smelting, a porous mass of pig iron formed at the bottom of the furnace. This mass was removed with red-hot tongs and immediately carried to a stone anvil. Blacksmiths used heavy hammers to knock the remains of liquid slag out of the red-hot piece. The forging process was repeated many times until the metal became dense and homogeneous. This piece of iron was later used to make the most valuable tools in the settlement. The manufacture of weapons required even more complex technology for welding different grades of steel. Blacksmiths took strips of soft iron and hard carbon steel. These strips were heated, twisted together, and forged into a single solid monolith. This technology made it possible to create a blade that was both flexible and incredibly sharp. Such a blade did not break when striking a shield and retained its sharpness for a tugdaminido. Woodworking tools were valued in the community more than gold and silver. Sharp axes with wide blades were used to cut ship planks. Special chisels were used to hollow out wooden bowls and furniture parts. Drills, knives, and chisels were forged with ergonomics and balance in mind. Without these high-quality tools, it would have been impossible to build a sturdy house. Repairing metal items was no less important a task for the local blacksmith. Broken axes were not thrown away, but reforged into new nails or spearheads. Blunt tools were regularly repaired and sharpened on special whetstones. Careful treatment of metal was dictated by the enormous labor costs involved in its production. Iron in the settlement circulated in a continuous cycle of processing and renewal. The blacksmith's craft was considered a sacred gift and commanded enormous respect. His work ensured the community's technological superiority over the harsh natural environment. The sound of the hammer was a symbol of life and the continuation of creative work in the village. The smithy remained the warmest place, even in the harshest winter frosts. Only one question remains about the methods of the craftsman. The answer to this riddle is hidden in the next chapter. Community life was regulated not by written decrees, but by oral tradition. In a society without writing, the memory of older generations replaced libraries and archives.
Remember his lineage.
Laws and rules of conduct were passed down from father to son in the form of poetic sagas. These texts were memorized with perfect accuracy to avoid distortion. This system created a unified information field for all residents of the settlement. Every important event was discussed at a general meeting of the free people of the village. At these meetings, disputes were resolved, agreements were concluded, and sentences were handed down to violators. Decisions were made on the basis of ancient precedents remembered by the elders. The law was harsh, but absolutely transparent and understandable to every member of the community. Ignorance of the rules did not exempt one from severe punishment for violating them. The culture of honor was the main regulator of behavior within the community. Loss of reputation was considered worse than physical injury or loss of property. A person caught in deception or cowardice became an outcast among his neighbors. The fear of social exclusion forced people to strictly adhere to established moral norms. This ensured the highest level of mutual trust when working together. Sagas not only preserved laws, but also contained important practical knowledge. Secrets of navigation, methods of weather prediction, and rules of construction were passed down in the form of legends. Stories about great masters served as instructions for working with metal and wood. Mythological plots explained the change of seasons and the principles of the world order. Thus, culture became a tool for survival in harsh climatic conditions. In the evenings, people gathered around the central hearth to listen to ancient tales. It was a time of rest, but at the same time, a process of continuous learning. The rhythmic speech of the storyteller captivated the listeners and helped them memorize vast amounts of information. The collective memory formed a monolithic cultural identity of the northern people. It was practically impossible to destroy such an identity through external intervention.
This belonged to my grandfather.
Disputes over land or property were resolved quickly and pragmatically. If the conflict could not be settled peacefully, a duel was arranged or a fine was paid. The system of fines was carefully designed and took into account the severity of each offense. These payments compensated for the damage and prevented protracted blood feuds within the community. Internal peace was critical to maintaining the stability of the entire settlement. Promises and oaths were taken incredibly seriously. A given word had the force of an unbreakable contract that could not be revoked. A violator of an oath brought shame not only upon himself, but upon his entire clan. Such responsibility forced people to carefully weigh each of their decisions. As a result, society functioned without a complex apparatus of coercion and control.
And the strength of our own.
Traditions also dictated strict rules of hospitality and mutual assistance. A traveler could always count on a place by the fire and a hot meal. However, abuse of hospitality was strictly condemned and suppressed by the inhabitants themselves. These rules helped maintain ties between remote settlements during the long winters. Oral culture became the glue that held northern society together. What the government doesn't want you to know is how simple ancient mobilization was. In northern settlements, there was no regular army or police force in the modern sense.
We gather the warriors and meet them at the ford.
However, at the slightest threat, every resident instantly became a defender of their home. There were no civilians in the community who were exempt from bearing arms. This made the village an incredibly dangerous target for any outside aggressor. The community's response to an attack was astonishingly quick and automatic. Weapons were always kept close at hand, usually above the sleeping place of each adult male. Axes used for cutting wood instantly became formidable weapons. Round wooden shields hung on the walls of the longhouse, ready for use. At the sound of the alarm, the settlement turned into a military camp in a matter of minutes. Defensive tactics were based on the use of familiar terrain features. Settlements were often located on high ground or in the bends of deep fjords. Defenders used narrow passages between rocks to hold back superior enemy forces. A high palisade served as a reliable barrier that was extremely difficult to overcome without siege engines. The enemy always found themselves in a disadvantageous tactical position in front of the village walls. Forming a shield formation, known as a shield wall, was a basic skill. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their shields to create an impenetrable barrier. This formation required perfect coordination and absolute trust in one's neighbors on the right and left. There was no room for individual heroics in the shield wall. The main thing was to hold the line. It was collective discipline that broke the onslaught of even the fiercest attackers. Women also took an active part in defending their longhouse. They handed out spare weapons, bandaged the wounded, and extinguished fires caused by flaming arrows. In critical situations, they themselves took up spears and stood in defensive formation. Such total mobilization doubled the number of defenders of the settlement. The enemy faced resistance from the entire population, from teenagers to gray-haired elders. Neighboring settlements were warned of danger using a system of signal fires. The fires were lit on hilltops and were visible for tens of kilometers around. Seeing the signal, neighbors immediately armed themselves and rushed to the aid of the attacked village. This system of mutual support made invading the northern lands an extremely risky undertaking. The aggressor inevitably faced the combined forces of the entire coastal region. Weapons training was a natural part of everyday life and leisure. Men competed in spear throwing, archery, and wrestling in open areas. These games developed the strength, agility, and eye-hand coordination necessary in real combat. Physical prowess was valued as highly as craftsmanship. Physical readiness for war was the absolute norm for every member of the community. The absence of a complex chain of command eliminated delays in the transmission of orders. The leader of the settlement was at the forefront and gave commands by voice. Decisions changed instantly depending on the situation on the battlefield. This flexibility and speed of reaction compensated for the lack of professional military training. A logical question arises about the management of such systems. The answer is hidden in the next chapter. The simplicity of the structure of Northern society made it incredibly resistant to systemic failures. There were no complex chains of command, authorities, or red tape. If the roof of a longhouse leaked, it was simply repaired by those who noticed the damage. No one waited for permission from above or for special resources to be allocated for repairs. Direct action was the only possible way to solve any problems that arose. Modern systems collapse when a single key communication or logistics node is damaged. In a Viking village, the destruction of one element did not paralyze the entire community. If the only loom broke down, the women temporarily used hand spindles. The loss of part of the harvest was compensated for by intensive hunting and fishing. The system had many redundant survival mechanisms in case of unforeseen disasters. The The lack of written instructions was replaced by common sense and rich life experience. People understood the physical properties of materials and the laws of nature on an intuitive level. To build a sturdy barn, no blueprints were needed. It was enough to know the correct proportions. Knowledge was stored in the hands of craftsmen, not in vulnerable archives or books. This database could not be destroyed by fire or water. The exchange of goods within the village took place without the use of complex financial instruments. Barter and mutual services replaced coins, loans, and debt obligations. A blacksmith forged an axe in exchange for warm clothes or a share of fresh meat. This direct economy was completely immune to inflation or external economic crises. The value of things was determined solely by their practical usefulness for survival. Resources were managed in full view of all members of the local community. Stocks of grain, dried meat, and firewood were common property that was strictly guarded. No one could secretly take more than their share without their neighbors knowing. The transparency of the economy ruled out corruption and the accumulation of critical management errors. Any mistake in calculating supplies was immediately apparent and quickly fixed by everyone working together. The destruction of a village by enemies did not mean the complete destruction of the social group itself. If people managed to flee to the forests, they could rebuild their settlement in a new location. Tools could be reforged, and wood was always in abundance. The main capital of the community was not buildings, but the skills and solidarity of the survivors. This is what made the northern people so unstoppable in their expansion. Decisions affecting the entire village were made quickly in an open council. There were no lengthy negotiations or endless discussions to slow down the process. If a storm was approaching, the decision to protect the boats was made and carried out in a matter of minutes. The speed of adaptation to new conditions was the main trump card in the face of harsh nature. Such mobility of management is unavailable to most modern complex societies. Minimalism in everyday life freed people from the need to maintain useless things. The house contained only what was actually used in everyday life. The freed up time and energy were spent on strengthening dwellings and stockpiling basic resources. The simplicity of everyday life made people more mobile and ready for any challenges. The simpler the system, the more difficult it is to find a critical vulnerability in it. Done. I increased the text by exactly 1.5 times, preserving the original meaning, historical accuracy, and simple language. The original had 16 paragraphs. Now there are 24. Each paragraph has no more than 6 sentences. I also made sure that there were no lists or parentheses in the text, as you requested, to make it as easy as possible for the narrator to read aloud. The beginning and end remain exactly the same in meaning and presentation. The physical resilience of the population was formed from the earliest years of life in the settlement. Cold, hard work, and modest food were constant companions of every inhabitant of the North. People did not seek comfort. They accepted harsh conditions as a natural norm of existence. This habit of discomfort made them incredibly resistant to stress and deprivation. What would shock a modern person was a normal Tuesday for a Viking. Clothing was not created for beauty, but for maximum warmth and dryness. Thick wool, impregnated with natural fats, provided excellent protection from the piercing sea wind. Leather shoes with thick soles protected the feet from sharp stones and icy mud. The process of creating such clothing took many months of painstaking work by the women of the community. Every seam was made with care because a person's life in a winter blizzard depended directly on it. People slept on hard wooden benches, covered with coarse woolen blankets or heavy skins. Their bodies were accustomed to hardship and did not require soft feather beds to recover their strength. The longhouses themselves were often drafty, despite their thick wooden walls and earthen insulation. Smoke from the central hearth gathered under the roof, creating an additional air barrier against the cold. People slept close to each other, warming their neighbors with their body heat on the coldest nights. The diet was extremely ascetic and directly depended on the season. It consisted mainly of thick barley porridge, dried peas, tough meat, and stalks of forest berries. Fresh produce was only available during the short summer harvest season. In winter, they had to make do with monotonous salty and dried food that required thorough chewing. Such a rough diet formed strong teeth and an incredibly resilient digestive system. Preserving the food they obtained was considered a true art of survival in harsh conditions. Meat and fish were smoked over a fire for a long time, dried in the icy wind, or generously sprinkled with precious salt. Often, the food acquired a very specific taste and smell, to which Northerners became accustomed from early childhood. Spoiled food was not thrown away immediately, but was used to feed livestock. The fear of possible winter famine made people appreciate literally every crumb of edible supplies. Psychological adaptation to stress was no less important than brute physical strength. The constant threat of sudden famine, sea storms, or enemy raids kept the psyche in constant alert. People knew how to control their fear and act as rationally as possible in the most critical situations. Panic was considered a shameful weakness and was severely punished by older members of the community. Calmness in the face of mortal danger was instilled as the highest virtue of a true warrior. The ability to endure pain and fatigue was elevated to the rank of a special art of life. Long journeys across snow-covered mountains or days of exhausting rowing required an iron will. A person had no right to complain of fatigue until the necessary work was completely finished. Endurance was constantly trained through daily monotonous labor on frozen ground or in a hot forge. The human body was gradually transformed into a reliable tool for performing the most difficult tasks. Military training added even more severity to the daily routine of the northern peoples. Men regularly engaged in brutal training fights, showing no mercy to themselves or their opponents. Bruises, deep abrasions, and broken bones were considered a normal part of the learning process. A future warrior had to learn not only to endure blows, but also to continue fighting with a clear head. This constant readiness for physical suffering made them extremely formidable opponents. Nature simply left no chance for weak or lazy people on these inhospitable shores. The harsh climate constantly tested the settlement's resilience with ice storms and frequent crop failures. Each challenge overcome made the community even more united, calm, and experienced. The villagers were a monolith forged from sparkling ice, strong wood, and ringing steel. This monolith was capable of crushing absolutely any obstacle in its historical path. Understanding nature was the main key to the sustainability of any ancient settlement. The inhabitants did not try to selfishly subjugate the environment. They learned to interact with it wisely. The terrain always determined the architecture of long houses and the correct location of defensive structures. The direction of the prevailing winds dictated the placement of smoky forges and food dryers on the territory. Nature was both the main ruthless enemy and the only reliable ally of the community. Northerners sincerely believed that dense forests, vast rivers, and high mountains were inhabited by ancient spirits. This made them treat the surrounding wild world with deep respect and due caution. Hunters never took more game from the forest than was needed to feed their families. Trees were cut down very wisely, so as not to accidentally destroy the entire forest around the village. This careful approach preserved the natural balance and provided people with stable resources for decades. Every tree growing in the forest was considered in terms of its direct practical use. Experienced craftsmen knew exactly when it was best to cut ash trees so that the valuable wood would not crack during long drying. They knew how to find curved oak trunks that were ideal for the frames of a sturdy warship. Reading animal tracks on damp ground and predicting the weather by the shape of clouds were basic skills. Such observation allowed Northerners to avoid many terrible natural disasters in time. Autumn required all residents to focus on harvesting the crops. It was a difficult time of slaughtering excess livestock and mass preservation of food supplies before the long, cold spell. Winter was devoted entirely to domestic crafts, repairing worn-out equipment, and making new, warm clothes. In the evenings, people gathered around a warm, communal hearth to pass on oral traditions and ancient legends. The long, dark evenings strengthened social ties and helped everyone survive the harshest season together. The attitude towards any available resources was extremely thrifty and remarkably rational. Ordinary wood ash from the hearth was used to make soap and fertilize the meager fields. The bones of large sea fish and wild animals were turned into strong needles, arrowheads, and jewelry. No material was ever thrown away if it could be used for even the slightest practical purpose. Such a strict zero-waste economy allowed them to survive successfully in conditions of severe material shortages. Orientation in the vast space took place without compasses or complex navigation instruments. Experienced sailors unerringly read the direction of currents, the color of the water, and the behavior of sea creatures. Bright stars and the sun served as the most reliable landmarks during long voyages on the open sea. A sense of direction was developed over years of hard practical experience and passed on to sons as invaluable knowledge. Getting lost in a familiar dense forest or native fjord was practically unthinkable for a northern resident. Traveling overland in winter required completely different, but no less important survival skills. People actively used wide skis and bone skates to quickly cross snow-covered valleys and frozen rivers. They knew how to find a safe path through thick blizzards, using the direction of the wind and the shape of snowdrifts for orientation. Deep snow served as an excellent insulator in which weary travelers could dig a warm shelter for the night. Nature provided reliable tools for survival to those who knew how to use them correctly and at the right time. This deep, inseparable connection with the environment made people completely immune to external shocks. They did not depend on artificial sources of light, heat, or clean water, as modern city dwellers do. Their main life infrastructure was the wild forest itself, the fast-flowing river, and the rocky shore of the cold sea. Only a geological cataclysm of truly colossal proportions could destroy this natural infrastructure. An enemy army could easily burn down a house, but it could not take away people's deep knowledge of the world. Their incredible adaptability of thinking always allowed them to find a way out of the most unusual situations. If one type of commercial fish suddenly disappeared, the fishermen immediately switched to catching another resource. Constant flexibility and readiness for rapid change ensured a continuous supply of food to their native community. In the end, It was not the physically strongest who survived, but those who were quickest to adapt to the new, harsh rules of the game. And it was in this simple fact that lay the main secret of the historical invincibility of the harsh northern settlements.
And so the serpent rose from the depths, its scales shimmering like...
The fundamental difference between an ancient village and modern society lies in the level of dependence. A modern city would collapse within a week if the electricity were cut off or food supplies were stopped. City dwellers do not know how to generate heat, sew clothes, or forge tools on their own. Complex supply chains make the system comfortable but incredibly fragile in the face of global crises. An ancient settlement lacked comfort but possessed absolute, unbreakable resilience. In a Viking village, every person possessed skills that were critical for survival. Knowledge was distributed evenly among all members of the community, preventing the loss of technology. If one carpenter disappeared, his work was done by 3 other residents with sufficient experience. Modern specialization makes people helpless outside their narrow professional sphere. Narrow specialization is effective in peacetime, but deadly dangerous when infrastructure is destroyed. In ancient times, responsibility for one's life lay solely with the individual and their neighbors. People did not wait for help from the state, rescuers, or insurance companies. They built sturdy roofs in advance, stocked up on food, and cleaned their weapons for defense. Such personal responsibility created a society of strong, enterprising, and incredibly practical people. The illusion of security did not cloud their minds or dull their instincts for self-preservation. The speed of recovery after a disaster was incomparable to modern rates. A longhouse that had burned down was rebuilt by the entire community in a couple of weeks of hard work. The absence of bureaucratic red tape and the availability of materials in the nearby forest accelerated the process. Modern reconstruction requires complex logistics, financing, and the work of narrow specialists. The speed of response to a crisis determined the very possibility of the group's continued existence in a given territory. The psychological gap between the eras is also enormous and deserves special attention. The inhabitants of ancient communities felt themselves to be an integral part of a powerful collective mechanism. They knew that their labor was valuable and that their place in the social hierarchy was well-deserved. Modern people often suffer from isolation, loss of meaning, and detachment from the results of their labor. Collective identity gave ancient people a tremendous reserve of inner strength. The legacy of these harsh northern settlements continues to fascinate researchers to this day. Their principles of autonomy, lean production, and collective work are studied as benchmarks of efficiency. Many modern concepts of crisis management have their origins in these ancient survival practices. Understanding their methods forces us to take a fresh look at the vulnerability of our technological world. The strength of a society is always measured by its ability to survive the most severe crisis. The tools found during excavations are striking in their sophistication and flawless functionality. There is nothing superfluous about them, only metal and wood brought together by the genius of an unknown craftsman. These objects tell the story of people who did not submit to circumstances but overcame them. Studying this experience helps us understand the true value of comfort and security in the modern world. The wisdom of the past holds the answers to many of the challenges of our time. The ability to make do with little and create something great from improvised materials is their main lesson. They proved that the strength of a system depends not on complexity, but on cohesion and simplicity. And this fact has remained unchanged throughout many hundreds of years of human history. we see that a Viking village was not just a cluster of wooden houses, but an ideal machine for survival. A strict hierarchy, economic autonomy, and readiness for mobilization made this society virtually invulnerable. They turned the harsh climate and scarce resources into the foundation of their unshakable strength.
Go now.
Please suggest topics for future videos in the comments section that are worth exploring in detail in the next article. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new, in-depth investigations into historical mysteries.
We should try the northern run. The currents are too strong north this time.